In the waning days of the 16th century, the oceans belonged to empires. Spain ruled the Americas. Portugal ruled the seas to the east. And England, still a modest kingdom under Queen Elizabeth I, was looking for a way to compete. On December 31st, 1600, a royal charter was signed that would alter the course of world history. It granted exclusive rights to a small group of London merchants to trade in the East Indies. Their new venture was called the Governor and Company of Merchants of London Trading into the East Indies. But history would remember it by a shorter name, the East India Company. At first, it was a simple business. A few ships, a few investors. A promise of spices from Asia, pepper, nutmeg, cloves that could turn fortunes overnight. No one knew that this small band of traders would one day command armies, shape nations, and redraw maps. The early voyages were perilous. The seas were ruled by storms, pirates, and rival empires. Dozens of ships were lost before they ever saw land. But the rewards were too great to ignore. A single ship that made it back from the east could return its investors a profit of 500%. These voyages marked the beginning of what historians call early modern commerce, a new age of risk, investment, and reward. For the first time, wealth wasn't tied only to land or nobility. It could be built through global trade routes and maritime ambition. The East India Company was more than a business. It was the prototype for the modern multinational corporation. Its ships carried not just cargo, but contracts. Not just goods, but influence. And as its profits grew, so did its power. By the mid-17th century, the company was no longer merely trading spices. It was fighting wars for them. The Dutch and Portuguese had carved out colonies across Asia, and the British merchants found themselves locked in a deadly competition for control of maritime trade. The company adapted quickly. Its officers became diplomats, soldiers, and sometimes pirates. They built fortified outposts along the coasts of India, Surat, Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta, each one a fortress of commerce and ambition. But it wasn't just about trade anymore. The East India Company had begun weaving itself into the fabric of Asian politics. Local rulers sought its alliance, some feared it. Others tried to play it against rival powers. One of the most important figures during this era was Sir Josiah Child, a governor of the company who believed profit and empire were one and the same. He argued that to protect British trade, the company must dominate, not negotiate. Under his guidance, fleets were expanded, fortifications strengthened, and diplomacy gave way to force. The company was no longer just part of British trade history. It was becoming Britain's arm abroad. Still, the company remained a business at heart. It thrived on early modern commerce, shares, dividends, and speculation. Wealthy investors in London treated its stock like a ticket to fortune. Its ledgers were filled with profit margins, not moral questions. Yet beneath the success lay the first hints of what was to come. Every profit extracted from Asia left behind resentment. Every alliance forged carried seeds of betrayal. As the 18th century began, the East India Company had become something entirely new, a private empire. It wasn't ruled by a king or parliament, but by merchants in boardrooms. The turning point came in 1757 at the Battle of Plassey. In the humid fields of Bengal, company officer Robert Clive led 3,000 men against the Nawab of Bengal, who commanded an army of 50,000. Through cunning, bribery, and betrayal, Clive won. That single victory transformed the East India Company from a trading enterprise into a territorial power. It began collecting taxes, minting coins, and enforcing laws across Bengal. For the first time in world history, a corporation ruled a country. Under the banner of trade, the company drained India's wealth. Cotton, silk, salt, and opium flowed out of the subcontinent, while British goods flowed in. It wasn't just commerce anymore, it was economic conquest. The company's profits soared, but so did the suffering of millions. Famine followed the disruption of traditional industries. Local rulers became puppets, dependent on British loans and military protection. The East India Company had become the embodiment of global trade routes, connecting continents, but also exploiting them. Even the British government began to grow uneasy. How could a corporation have its own army, navy, and diplomacy? How could a company decide the fate of entire nations? The answer was simple: money. The company was too profitable to question. By the mid-1700s, its dividends funded not just merchants, but members of parliament. Its influence reached from the ports of Calcutta to the corridors of Westminster. By the late 18th century, the company's dominion was vast. It governed over 20 million people in India, commanded a private army of 260,000 soldiers, twice the size of Britain's own, and generated staggering revenue. But power breeds corruption. Company officials grew rich overnight, looting treasuries and manipulating markets. Robert Clive himself returned to England with a fortune equivalent to hundreds of millions in today's money. When accused before Parliament of corruption, Clive defended himself coldly. "I stand astonished at my own moderation." But behind the grandeur, a storm was brewing. The company's greed had consequences. Its exploitation led to famines, economic collapse, and rebellion. In 1770, Bengal was struck by a famine that killed nearly 10 million people. Yet the company's tax collectors continued their work. Revenue targets had to be met. Profits had to flow. This was the dark heart of British trade history, the pursuit of wealth at any cost. The British Parliament could no longer ignore it. In 1773, it passed the Regulating Act, placing the company under partial government oversight. It was the first sign that the empire of profit was cracking under its own weight. Still, the company endured. It adapted, as corporations always do. It expanded into opium trade with China, opened new routes, and tightened its grip on India. And in doing so, it sowed the seeds of its own destruction. By the dawn of the 19th century, the East India Company was more powerful than ever, but also more hated. It had become both the symbol and the instrument of British imperialism. Its administrators ruled from grand palaces. Its officers commanded armies in faraway provinces. But its shareholders in London still demanded one thing above all: profit. As Britain industrialized, India became both its market and its supplier. Cotton grown in Bengal fed the mills of Manchester. Opium exported from India funded Britain's trade deficit with China. The balance sheets looked good. The human cost did not. Across India, resentment simmered. Traditional rulers had been replaced. Farmers were crushed by taxes. Soldiers serving under British command felt humiliated by foreign authority. In 1857, that anger erupted into open revolt, the Indian Rebellion. It began as a mutiny of Indian soldiers, but quickly spread into a nationwide uprising. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the company's empire would fall. But the British crown intervened. The rebellion was crushed, brutally. Villages were burned, thousands executed. And in the aftermath, the British government finally acted. In 1858, the East India Company was dissolved. Its territories, armies, and revenue were taken over by the British Crown. The British Raj was born. After nearly 260 years, the world's most powerful corporation ceased to exist. The East India Company may have vanished, but its shadow still lingers. It reshaped the global economy, pioneered corporate governance, and left a blueprint for the multinational giants of today. Its story is the story of early modern commerce, how ambition, trade, and profit could build an empire. It connected continents through global trade routes, but it also exposed the cost of unchecked greed. Historians still debate what the company truly represented. Was it a symbol of progress, opening the world to new markets and ideas? Or was it a warning, a testament to how easily commerce becomes conquest? Perhaps it was both. The East India Company began as a dream of adventure and enterprise. It ended as an empire of exploitation, but its influence didn't die with it. Every modern corporation, every global trading network carries a piece of that legacy. A reminder that when profit becomes power, history repeats itself. The rise and fall of the East India Company is more than a story of trade. It is the story of human ambition. It shows how wealth can unite nations and destroy them. How the pursuit of profit can ignite progress and suffering. In the history of British trade, no enterprise was ever so small in its beginnings or so vast in its consequences. From a handful of ships on the Thames to an empire that ruled millions, the East India Company remains the ultimate symbol of how maritime trade built the modern world and how easily it can consume it.